Welcome to this week's edition of the ASF ScotsinUS podcast, Harris Tweed from the island to world stage. Harris Tweed is one of Scotland's most iconic brands. But where is Harris Tweed from? Who makes it? What makes it so unique and prized and used by some of the world's leading designers? Why is your grandfather's jacket still that wonderful jacket? Just as fashionable and stylish today, timeless. This week, we look to answer some of those questions as we speak to Malcolm Campbell, also known as Malcolm the Weaver. Malcolm is a leading expert whose life is and has been about Harris Tweed. He learned to weave as a child and then went on to college to study and has worked in that industry in various guises all his life, and now designs and leads Cloth of Kings. And so please join Malcolm and I in conversation.
Waking up at 6 a.m. could be a hustle. Keeping my equipment on the bus too. The jobs is do the thing I love.
Good morning, Malcolm. I'm delighted you're able to join us today from Harrogate.
Yep.
And today we're going to take you back up to the islands that you love so much, to Harris and Lewis, to talk to us about your love of textiles, your love of Harris Tweed, and also all that you love to do for young people, for children. But so if we could begin by taking us back up to Scotland and beginning us on your journey with Harris Tweed.
Okay, Camilla, that's fine. My journey began way back in 1969 as a 15-year-old boy. I was working part-time in a weaving mill, and I wondered what I was going to do when I left school. My uncles were policemen, and they had me enrolled in Tullyallen Police College, but I did not want to be a policeman. So my mother, who was a mender of cloth, encouraged me to try and get an apprenticeship as a textile designer, which is what I did. And I worked with A&J McNabb in Haddington in Scotland, and went to the Scottish College of Textiles in Galashiels for 5 years on block release, which was a very good course because it was the City and Guilds of London Institute, and I passed the exams on textile design and on business studies. During my time at McNabb's, we worked with the Harris Tweed industry. My boss, a chap called Douglas Johnson, was involved with Harris Tweed as well as involved with A&J McNabb. And we used to help to market and sell Harris Tweed around the world. So my initial introduction to Harris Tweed came as a 16-year-old boy as I was serving my apprenticeship as a textile designer. The Harris Tweed industry dates all the way back to 1845, when Lady Dunmore, the wife of the Duke of Atholl, started the industry. The Murray of Atholl tartan was her dress tartan, and she wove it in Harris Tweed.
So Harris Tweed is a tiny, Harris Tweed is produced on 2 islands, Harris and Lewis. And for our listeners who may not really understand, they are very small islands in the northwest of Scotland. Could you sort of put all of that in context as well, how this has managed to go from this island community to the runways?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that happened in the Isle of Lewis, handloom weaving was one of the key industries. Handloom weaving and fishing were the 2 industries that were paramount on the island for the livelihood of the islanders. And if you look around the world, handloom weaving has been the initial industry that started most communities. As an example, in Glasgow, there used to be 4,000 handloom weavers. The Yorkshire and Bradford textile industry in Huddersfield started off with handloom weaving. And every developing country has had handloom weavers. What is exclusive and unique to the Isle of Harris and the Isle of Lewis is that they have retained the industry. Most other countries have gone for mechanization, have gone for power looms, but the Harris Tweed industry has maintained the handloom weaving aspect of it, where every loom has to be owned by the weaver. The cloth cannot be woven in a weaving shed. The mills on the Isle of Lewis, there's 3 mills, they can buy the wool, spin the yarn and warp the cloth, but the handloom weaver in his croft must weave the cloth. The Harris Tweed Authority must then inspect the cloth and stamp it with the Harris Tweed orb to guarantee its authenticity. Back in the 60s and 70s, because Harris Tweed was so popular, and remember that Harris Tweed gets a premium price. 10 years ago, Harris Tweed would cost £22 a metre. Ordinary Yorkshire Tweed would cost between £8 and £10 a metre, and foreign tweeds would cost £5 to £6 a metre. So many unscrupulous people would weave an imitation Harris Tweed on the mainland and try to pass it off. And that's why the Harris Tweed Authority was established in 1963, to make sure that the proper Harris Tweed was authentic and carried the stamp of the Harris Tweed orb. In the heyday of Harris Tweed, everything was narrow width woven on narrow width looms. And the total production back in the 60s and 70s was approximately 7.5 million metres of narrow width cloth. That would equate to 3.5 million metres of full width cloth. The industry is much smaller today. Today you have 120 wide looms and you have about 140 to 150 handloom weavers, because the families, the father will handloom weave, the mother will handloom weave, and the children will handloom weave. So from 120 looms and 150 weavers, today's production is about 850,000 metres of full width cloth. And that's all that can ever be produced. They can't say, well, we're going to have a big production rise next year, we're going to produce 2 million metres. They don't have that facility. And that is why Harris Tweed is so exclusive and so unique, because there's a finite volume, there's a finite number of people that can produce it, and it's an exclusive product that has to come from the Isle of Lewis or the Isle of Harris. The Isle of Lewis tends to have all the weaving mills, but the weavers are on both the Isle of Lewis and the Isle of Harris, the handloom weavers.
So they cannot increase the amount of weavers. That is how it is set.
What the weavers have to do, Camilla, the weavers have to have their own croft, they have to have their own shed, they have to buy their own loom. So
Right.
They're all self-employed. I mean, during the recent COVID outbreak, there was no subsistence for the weavers because they were self-employed. So a weaver has to pay for his own loom. The looms cost between £15,000 and £18,000, so they're expensive machines. What needs to happen is, in the future, there needs to be government subsidies to help young people establish their own business and their own handloom weaving business. It's quite a time-consuming career, because the handloom weavers that I know and that I've met and visited, they will start work at 8 o'clock in the morning and they'll still be working at 8 o'clock at night. So they spend a lot of time weaving their Harris Tweed.
And the Harris Tweed cloth is wonderfully strong and has such character because of where it is produced, you know, from the natural dyes and the atmosphere and the waters and everything else. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yep, the fabric itself is very, very robust. I mean, pioneers used to go on expeditions using Harris Tweed before we had all the modern day fabrics for climbers and skiers and explorers. Harris Tweed was the key product because it was waterproof. When wool gets wet, it increases in temperature by 3 degrees, which is why sheep can survive in Australia and sheep can survive in the Scottish Highlands in deep, deep snow. So Harris Tweed was used by explorers, it was used by by travellers, and it was very, very robust and very, very hard wearing. Harris Tweed, just like kilts, Scottish kilts, were passed down from generation to generation because the grandfather would pass it on to his son, would pass it on to his grandson. The key aspects of Harris Tweed is that it is woven from the wool of the Cheviot sheep. Most of the suits that your listeners will be wearing are woven from merino sheep from Australia, which is a very, very fine wool. Merino sheep are a completely different breed of sheep to the Cheviot sheep. The Cheviot sheep have a coarser micron wool. Wool for suits tends to be 7, the micron indicates the fineness of the fiber. Merino wool tends to be between 17.5 and 19.5 microns, so it's very soft. Harris Tweed tends to be 30 micron to 35, so it's a coarse fiber. Because it's so tightly woven, and it's woven in Panama, plain weave, or twill, it's very tightly constructed in beautiful, beautiful colors. Most people in today's production systems have tried to make everything as cheaply as possible. Price deflation has been a big problem with the textile industry. But in Harris Tweed, they will use 5, 6, 7 different color components to create one shade. That's why the beauty of Harris Tweed is so astounding.
The richness of the weaving and the multiples of yarn that they're using to produce the cloth.
Yeah, that's what makes it unique.
Rather like really wonderful textiles that are silk screened. The cheap ones have 6 screens, and then the really wonderful textiles may have up to 20. And
that's good. That's a good comparison, Camilla. And but what you have with Harris Tweed is the true craft of weaving, the true skill of weaving, and the true artistry of weaving. The hand, not only is the cloth in the olden days, it was spun. It was spun by hand, woven by hand, and finished by hand. The cloth was finished and it was beaten. It was milled by groups of women round a table who used to sing and pound the cloth on the table to burst the fiber and to give it its beautiful milled finish. So the whole aspect of Harris Tweed is a romanticism. Very few other fabrics have that. You can't, even the top weavers, Ermenegildo Zegna, Giorgio Armani, they cannot copy what Harris Tweed has. And Harris Tweed is very, very comfortable. You can wear Harris Tweed in the rain, in the cold, in the snow. And one of the key aspects that I developed maybe 5, 6 years ago, I developed a cloth.
And you were then recognized for all you were doing with the industry, all that was going on. So let's take a moment and then come back and hear how things changed with a meeting in 2014. Malcolm, your stature in the industry is so well known for all that you have done to bring along Harris Tweed on the world stage. I met you in New York because you were working with such major clients as Saks and Brooks Brothers and so many different people. And in 2010, I got it wrong just now, it was actually 2010, you were presented to Her Majesty the Queen, and this meeting really took you on a new route and gave you a new name. Absolutely.
It was in March 2010, I was invited to Buckingham Palace for a reception for the British fashion industry, a very prestigious event. There was about 250 people invited. There was the Emmanuels who designed Princess Diana's wedding dress. There was Zandra Rhodes, there was Paul Costello, there was Vivian Westwood, and there was me as the weaver, because I've designed cloth for each of these designers. And I'd taken down, I was working at the time on Harris Tweed, and I was working on some tartan designs. And Queen Victoria was very, very instrumental in developing tartans and promoting tartans around the world. And I had some things in my pocket that if I was introduced to the Queen, I was going to show her some things of interest. And sure enough, on the evening, I was introduced to Her Majesty the Queen as Mr. Campbell from Holland and Sherry, the company that I worked for at the time. I said to Her Majesty, "Good evening, ma'am. My name's Malcolm. I'm a Scottish weaver." And she turned to the Duke of Edinburgh and said, "This is Malcolm the Weaver." And I thought to myself, my goodness, the Queen has just called me Malcolm the Weaver. And later that evening, she came up and spoke to me, and I showed her the tartans that I was developing. I showed her the Balmoral tartan that was inspiring me. And she, in fact, gave me permission to develop the Balmoral tartan into Harris Tweed, which is the Callanish tartan that I'm wearing just now. I developed the Callanish tartan, but I also developed the Cloth of Kings based on Harris Tweed and marketed that as shooting accessories, as tailoring fabric, as upholstery fabric. And that was a good thing that's helped the Harris Tweed industry, because we developed a new cloth that performed for upholstery. It performed for the fire retardancy test. It performed for the abrasion tests. We applied stain resistance, water spillage. It was water resistant. And if you can imagine that a waistcoat takes 1 meter of cloth, a jacket takes 3 meters of cloth, a coat will take 4 meters of cloth, but a chair will take 7 meters of cloth. A sofa will take 14 meters of cloth. So that was a really good benefit, a bonus for the Harris Tweed industry when some of the major upholstery companies started to use Harris Tweed. I tried to market that in America.
Harris Tweed would be wonderful on a sofa or on a wingback chair. So yeah. It's so needed, yes.
I tried to sell it in America, but unfortunately the climate in America is a bit too warm. And the American market at the time were not too keen on it, but it worked very, very well in Europe and Scandinavia and Germany, etc. So Harris Tweed has expanded over the last 10 years into the apparel market, into the accessory market, but also into the furniture and interior market. Malcolm the Weaver was the starting point for the Cloth of Kings. I resigned from my position at Holland and Sherry after that meeting with Her Majesty the Queen and set up my business, the Cloth of Kings. I then was invited by BBC Scotland to do a programme on Harris Tweed for children on CBeebies. And with my 6-year-old son and daughter, I have twin son and daughter, we went up to the Isle of Lewis and recorded for 3 days a programme which your listeners will be able to see on YouTube called Malcolm the Weaver, educating 4 to 8-year-old children in the art, the craft of colour and Harris Tweed textile design.
Oh, Malcolm, those books are so wonderful. So we're going to take a short break now, and then if you could tell us about this other side of your love of textiles and educating children. So we'll be back in a second.
Daddy Malcolm works on an island called Lewis, off the coast of Scotland in the Western Isles. He used to be a weaver, a bit like the lady in this old film.
So Malcolm, you've had this deep love of Harris Tweed and textiles all your life. And I think that one of the great joys you have is actually taking it forward to the next generation, because over the last few years, you've forwarded to me, sent me these wonderful books you've been writing of Malcolm the Weaver. And I have 2 of them, but I believe there's now a 3rd. Could you tell us about Malcolm the Weaver and the tremendous success you've had in reaching so many children now?
Yeah, well, we started, my daughter Sharon, who lives in New Zealand, illustrates the books to the stories that I've written. And what I wanted to do was to teach children. I realized when my son and daughter, Aidan and Zoe, were on the Isle of Lewis, that they didn't understand too much about colour. They had a favourite colour, but they didn't know a lot about colour. They didn't know where colour came from. They didn't know how colour was affected, primary colours, secondary colours. They certainly didn't know about weaving. And I feel it's very, very important, especially in today's society, especially with this pandemic that we've just gone through, where children they've had a year, the 18 months of their lives taken from them. And also because of the mobile phones and the laptops, my concern is that children are losing the ability to interact, the social skills that we were all taught. Today's children don't have them. What I'd like to do for your listeners, Camilla, is just read my mantra, which is in the second book that we published. But right. If your listeners can appreciate this, our children face a world which is changing at an amazing pace. Wow. The way we live our lives today will not be the way that children live their lives tomorrow. Technology is driving change in every aspect of society. It seems that everything has to be newer, faster, smarter, and better than it has ever been before. This scale of change at this incredible pace can be overwhelming to young minds, which are still inexperienced and developing. Children need a wise and engaging guru to understand and appreciate the world around them, someone to help them to see the magic and the fundamentals of life and to enjoy the happiness of living, someone to inspire their confidence, to explore and to ask questions, someone to deliver knowledge and create ambition, someone to help them to dream and discover their destiny. That someone is Malcolm the Weaver. And that leads us to the fact that we've now got the books in 8,000 schools in UK. There's 22,000 schools altogether. The books are in 8,000 schools. They're also in schools in Ethiopia. They're in schools in India. They're in schools in China. They're in schools in America. So my ambition is to one day get the books translated into Mandarin Chinese, into Hindu, and to work with various countries to get the books. Because the books at the moment, the 3 books we've written, teach children about colour, about art, about craft, about sustainability, about nature, and about the environment. I've just got a couple of things here to show your listeners. This is a page from the first book where we teach children about the Munsell colour system and the difference between a rose, a brick, and a bus, how the colours are completely different. The next book will teach them about pollution of the rivers and pollutions of the sea, how the colours go from bright and fresh to dull and grey.
That's wonderful.
If you pollute the rivers and you pollute the seas, then the whole environment changes. And the third book, and one of the interesting things with the books, is they're flip books. On one side, you have the story, The Tide That Stayed Out, and on the other side, flip it over, and you've got The Wind That Never Blew. So it teaches children about the ebbing and flowing of the tide and the effect of the wind. And one of the pages that I'll show you from the third book shows the children the waxing and waning of the moon. Many adults don't know the facts of waxing and waning moons.
So I think that would be quite a good conversation and a reminder. But,
Yeah.
but you have also given these books to the schools and to the children. And that's so wonderful what you've managed to do by inspiring others to join your mission and finding sponsors to do this. So the children covered by, how many children do you believe you've reached?
I reckon if you look at 8,000 schools and say, for instance, say they have an average of 500 4 to 8-year-olds, then that is a lot of children. And
you give several books to a school?
Certain schools, some schools get a set of books which go into the library. Other schools will get a set of 30 sets of books which go into a class. So the books stay in that class for the next set of 4 to 8-year-olds, and it goes on and on. My ambition is to get sponsors, and there's been some fantastic sponsors. In fact, just before I came on this call, I had another sponsor. I've written to 200 companies, Mars, confectionery, Shell, oil, trying to get them to encourage them to talk about sustainability, nature friendliness, and colour. And I try to get companies to sponsor 50 sets, 100 sets, or 200 sets of books. And I'm finding that the most popular one is the 200 sets, where a company will give books to maybe 20 schools in their region, and they'll give 10 sets of books to each school. And the book, a set of books for the trilogy of 3 is £25 a set.
Yeah, that's absolutely wonderful. And they're also available via Amazon, aren't they?
You can get them on Amazon, or the company I work with, which is a charity, is the Society of Dyers and Colourists. And if you go onto the website of the Society of Dyers and Colourists, you can buy them there, and you can buy them on Amazon as well.
Well, we will put that up at the end. But it is so important to bring along the next generation of weavers, to inspire artists. You were 15 when you began your career, learning about, working in a weaving mill and then doing a course in design. I mean, so this early interaction with the children is so important. So just so that we can conclude today, I could go on talking to you forever. It's so interesting. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the designers who are taking forward Harris Tweed? I know that Chanel has been a wonderful component of Harris Tweed, Vivian Westwood as well. I mean, they really have understood it and love it and work ahead, because they do have to really plan out when they want to do this, because it has to be the sheet, the wool has to be spun, it then has to be woven, it then has to go to them. This is, you're working a year to 2 years out.
Absolutely. I reckon that a textile, any designer is looking at 5 or 6 seasons at one time. They're looking at what happened last season, the season before, what's happening now, and then what they need to plan for the future. The more expensive the cloth, the longer it takes to produce. My advice to the textile designers that I work with is to spend time and develop their own yarn and their own colours so they don't have me too. One of my criticisms of the industry is that it did sell to some of the high street retailers, which brought the price down a little bit and brought the image down a little bit. When you see Harris Tweed on less expensive items, like accessories, like dolls, etc., I think it can affect the stature that it has in the fashion industry. Chanel have been fantastic. Chanel do full fashion shows and catwalk presentations using Harris Tweed in their own colours. Vivian Westwood, in fact, took the orb and created their own brand from the Harris Tweed orb. There was a bit of a kerfuffle when it happened, but I think the view was that somebody as popular as Vivian Westwood would help the brand rather than cause it any damage. And Vivian Westwood visited Scotland on a designer's tour, and I in fact met Vivian Westwood, and she came to the Edinburgh Woolen Mill when I worked there, and the Edinburgh Woolen Mill were one of the biggest buyers of Harris Tweed at the time for menswear and ladies' wear. And Vivian Westwood spoke to me about her design. She came in a bright tiara, flashing lights and big high heel boots. But the funny story is that that evening she was on the local television on Border News. And Vivian Westwood had said that she was a designer as a little girl, she loved designing, and that her mother and father had always wished that they had a little boy. And Vivian Westwood appeared, so they called her Vivian. And she said, I'm sure if I'd been born a little boy, I would have been called Malcolm Campbell. And I thought, well, that was quite a compliment for Vivian Westwood, had she been a boy, to have taken my name.
Well,
But
we need people like Vivian Westwood who love tartan, love Scotland, and understand it, because that is how the industry will sustain. Because it is, as you said, it's these people living in croft houses on the island who are doing this, and it's limited. So where do you see the industry in 15 years? It seems that the Harris Tweed Authority has a lot on its shoulders.
I would like to think that my own view is that with the recent pandemic, with people realizing the fragility of life, with people realizing what's happening, because believe it or not, the market in apparel has really taken off over the last 2 weeks, because as well as working with Harris Tweed, I also work with an Egyptian company and an Indian company, and around the world, clothes are starting to sell again in very, very fast and large numbers. 4 reasons for this. One is the fact that weddings are starting to take place again. So you're getting large groups of people going to weddings. The second is that horse racing has started again. So people are dressing up to go to the horse races. The third is that young people have started their proms. After school proms that for 2 years now have been cancelled. They're organising the ones that have been missed. But the fourth reason, which I found surprising and was not expecting at all, is that over lockdown, many people have put on a lot of weight. They've not been exercising. So all these people have had to go out and get new clothes made. The old suits, instead of going to the gym, as I've done for 18 months, been exercising and keeping fit, they've just got bigger and bigger. So when they try to go out, they've had to go and get new clothes made. So the Harris Tweed jacket that would fit them 2 years ago doesn't fit them anymore, which is good for the tailors and good for the retailers.
I think we're a little bit behind you over here, but I think that everybody has been in these sweatpants and dressing with the waist up.
Horrible.
And I do think they've also, there's an appreciation for things in a different way now. The pandemic has made us slow down, take a look at things, and I think really appreciate a lot of things we took so for granted. And so I think that Harris Tweed in that way will benefit. But I do love your remark about the COVID weight. I think that that's very true. But so you see a healthy industry.
Yes.
And I do think that the internet and the way that we can tell the story now and make sure people understand it will help.
Yeah, I think the public and I think it'll be. It's not everyone. It's not the whole. Everybody talks about the world as being a whole. Everybody being the same, and it's not. There is a certain market for Harris Tweed. Remember, as I said earlier, there is only 850,000 meters that can be produced. So it's bespoke. It's worth paying the money to help the industry to survive. And the suits last forever. I mean, disposable fashion, you read all the time, you see it on the news about the problems with pollution, with the waste, etc., etc. Everybody is becoming more and more aware of that. And I reckon that within the next few years, people will start to spend more on their clothing, to take more pride in themselves, to look like peacocks instead of looking like chickens as they walk around in their sweatpants and their jogging bottoms and whatever. Take a pride in yourself and look good, feel good, and you'll find that you perform better, you work better, you feel better. Your appearance is very, very important. Get back to the gym and wear Harris Tweed.
I love that. So Malcolm, I look forward to us catching up again soon. But just before we finish, the Cloth of Kings is available for people to buy, but it's in yardage, isn't it?
Yes, what I do is I sell cloth to tailors like Walker Slater in Edinburgh or Charlie Allen in London. And if you look at the website for the Cloth of Kings, www.theclothofkings.com, you'll see these garment makers from whom you can have garments made, whether it's a jacket, a pair of trousers, a skirt. And also to follow up on the books, www.malcolmtheweaver.com will give you the details of where the books can be purchased as well.
That's wonderful. So I hope you have a good day and we will see you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Camilla. Hello, I'm going to read to you a Malcolm the Weaver book, Weaver of a Life in Colour, written by me and beautifully illustrated by my daughter Sharon Campbell in New Zealand. Malcolm the Weaver spins his yarn and weaves his magic to teach children about nature and its colours, about the environment and about all things that matter in a young child's life, so you can understand and treasure the whole caboodle of being a wee human being. Malcolm the Weaver, Black House Boy, the early years. Malcolm the Weaver weaves dreams, but he didn't always weave dreams, oh no. When he was a little boy, he had no idea what he wanted to be when he grew up. A policeman, an artist, a spaceman, a spy. My name is Bond, James Bond. Perhaps even a weaver, but he could not weave. He didn't know how. His dream was then to learn the many crafts of textiles, colour and weaving. Malcolm loved being outside. He loved seeing nature, feeling nature, smelling nature, and sensing nature. He was always in the open air, in the woods, on the beach, in the hills, playing in the fields, and climbing the rocks. Malcolm was comfortable and at one with the birds, the flowers, their colours, the animals, and the fish. He was a very happy wee boy, like a little lone wolf. Whether he was in the sun, out in the rain, blowing in the wind, or under the full moon, it did not matter. Oh, no, no, no. Whatever the weather, Malcolm knew that the whole shebang was exactly the same, just hotter, colder, drier, windier, or wetter, depending on the climate. If things were not quite right, if he didn't feel quite as good as he should, he would think of calm and happiness and begin to feel better again. He began to realize there was a magic that he could change things, change them from bad to good. Malcolm lived on the beautiful island in Scotland called the Isle of Lewis. He would listen to Roddy the Weaver in the thatched black house cottages, which were home to his family and animals. Shuttle treadle weave pick, weaving more and more cloth with wool from the Cheviot sheep, spun into beautiful woolen yarns. The yarns were dyed into glorious colours from nature's plants and flowers. Scarlet from privet berries, reddish brown from lichen and moss, orange from brambles, yellow from teasel and fern roots, greens from heather, blue from elderberry, violet from cress and bilberries, magenta from dandelion roots, black from oak bark and lily roots, and birch bark made beige. There are so many colours and so many plants, fruits and vegetables that make them. The handloom weaver wove the amazing coloured yarns into wonderful cloth, including herringbones, tartans and dogtooth designs. Shuttle treadle weave pick, shuttle treadle weave pick. The loom made these noises. The cloth was then washed in the streams to clean it and to make it beautiful. Suddenly all became clear. Malcolm was so inspired by the wonder of the weaver's work that he decided he too was going to be a weaver of cloth, to learn the magic of the loom, to spin yarns, to tell stories, and to weave dreams. His hopes and wishes would come true. Bad things would be good. Cruel things would be kind. Sad things would be happy. Wise things, funny things, curious things. The magic would loom over the whole caboodle. When he grew up, Malcolm the Weaver created all the colours that he wove into his cloth designs very carefully to make sure that his patterns were beautiful and that all the colours were in harmony together. Nobody wants to see a world without colour. It would be very dull and sad. Everybody has a favourite colour, and Malcolm the Weaver keeps everyone happy with his spectrum of shades, and he tells what his colours mean and how they affect life, moods, happiness and contentment. Colours make the world of difference. Wonderful colours make you feel wonderfully happy. A colour shows you what shade it is by its hue, a red hue or a green hue. It lets you see if it is a light colour or dark colour by its value. Finally, the colour's chroma lets you know if it is a very strong colour, like a scarlet red, or a washed out colour like a pink. And in the book, the children are shown the Munsell colouring system, and it's explained to them the difference between a red rose, a red brick, and a red fire engine. They're also taught the primary colours and the secondary colours in a very simple way, that red, yellow and blue are the primary colours, and they in turn make purple, orange and green, which are the secondary colours. Now, to be teaching this to 4 to 8-year-old children is very good, because normally they're in their teens before they learn this discipline on colour. The story goes on. Everything in nature has a colour. Life is woven into many coloured tapestries, with muted colours from the past, bright colours and vibrant colours from the future, and unusual colour combinations from your imagination and in your dreams. Every bird, flower, plant, fish, animal, person, rock, tree, shell, star, drop of rain, river, sea, mountain, the sun and the moon, even outer space, all have colours of their very own. Your eye sees the colour and passes the message of what it has seen to your mind, and your brain tells you what the colour is. It is a magical sensation. See all the colours of life in the natural rainbow. When the sun shines on raindrops, it is a magical thing too. The colours always run in the same order in the rainbow, from red to orange, to yellow, green, blue, and then to indigo and violet. So the children are taught the natural sequence of colours shown from the rainbow. We then go on to explain to children the emotion of colour. What does red mean? What does orange mean? What does yellow mean? What is the meaning of green? Peace, jealousy, freshness. And then what does blue mean? What does purple mean? And finally, the meaning of black and white. Malcolm the Weaver's dream is to take all the colours of the rainbow and to dye them into wool, then to spin them into a beautiful spangled yarn that would weave into the most glorious cloth in the world. The magical Harris Tweed would sparkle in the sunshine and would be used to tailor beautiful clothes that were the finest in the land, a colourful cloth that would be fit for a king. From that day forward, the king wore his beautiful clothes made from tweed. They had been woven on the magic loom in all the wonderful sparkling colours. All the people in the land were happy to see their king so proud and handsome. They knew that he would rule over them well and protect them from harm and evil. Peace, happiness and joy would reign over the whole caboodle. Birds sang, flowers bloomed, lambs skipped, and the spring sun shone. Shuttle, treadle, weave, pick, magic. So that's the first book in the trilogy. The second book, which is a flip book, is The Rainbow That Mixed Colours. And The Rainbow That Mixed Colours teaches children about the dangers of water pollution in the rivers and the seas. The flip book, which is the story on the other side, is The Moon That Shone Dark. That story teaches children about the dangers of car pollution, factory pollution, air pollution, teaching them to recognize the dangers to our planet and to the freshness of the air that we breathe. The third book in the trilogy is The Tide That Stayed Out. What would happen in life if the tide went out and never came back in again? It teaches children that the tide ebbs and flows twice a day. It teaches them about the magnetism of the moon, how the moon controls the ebbing and flowing of the tide. And it makes them appreciate what would happen if this natural phenomenon did not take place. On the other side of this book, the flip book, is The Wind That Never Blew. What would happen if there was no wind? There would be no waves in the sea. There would be no clouds flying over the sky. There would be no birds flying. So 6 stories within the trilogy of Malcolm the Weaver. I hope you've enjoyed me reading. I hope you enjoy reading the books to your children and your grandchildren, and they in turn enjoy reading to their children and grandchildren, because it's very, very important that we pass this message on to future generations to protect planet Earth. Thank you very much. Cheerio for now.
As the people start to listen and appreciate the stories I have told, the lyrics and melodies.
Thank you for joining us today in our journey with Malcolm to the Weaver's Cottage and to better understand what makes Harris Tweed so sought after. We are all hoping and trying to move events and programming forward, but the reality for all of us who are representing organizations and presenting events is, though we have come a long way from the total lockdown last year, there are large challenges to the events taking place. A clear example of this is New Hampshire Highland Games, which is being capped at 4,000 person capacity per day for a 3-day festival that would normally have had over 30,000 people attending. Highland Games are beginning to be planned, but for 1 day, not 3, or with, as in the case of New Hampshire, capacity cut back. As president of the American Scottish Foundation, I add our thank you to all of you, our listeners, friends, members and patrons, helping us to share our love of Scotland. Thank you for your support. Visit our website to learn more of our programming and of ways you can be involved. Our podcasts are released the first and third Monday of the month, and our Sounds from Scotland music link up, hosted by our music ambassador, Jamie McGeechan, is released live on the third Sunday of the month. Till next time.